Good afternoon and welcome to Insights Live. So I'm Steph Lambert from Meta, and I'm joined today by my colleagues in Connections Planning, Pete Buckley and Andy Childs, and we're here to share insights on redefining growth for a sustainable future. Next slide, please. Actually, 2 slides. Next one. Thank you. People are seeking out connection with leaders and influencers, organizations and businesses they can learn and get inspired from. At 95 years old, David Attenborough is one of the hottest Instagram influencers in recent years. We worked with him when he held the people's seat at the UN Climate Change Conference, COP24 in Poland, and on behalf of millions of people urged world leaders to take action on climate change. When David launched himself on Instagram with his message about how we need to protect the environment and preserve our fragile world, he broke even Jennifer Aniston's record for the fastest growing account to hit 1 million followers. On our platforms, there is strong engagement from people seeking out sustainability leaders for guidance and help and inspiration. And people are talking about sustainability on our platforms too. Next slide, please. In this Facebook IQ data, there's a big growth in the numbers of conversations happening on specific sustainability-related terms, with sustainable fashion, e-bikes, and sustainable living all showing significant increases year on year. Next slide, please. But as we all know, getting consumers engaged in this topic is only one part of a really big equation. Businesses play a significant role in the transformation because they drive such a significant amount of the emissions. And of course, with COP26, it feels like everything is really heating up. Businesses are kind of talking a lot more about their sustainability transformations, commitments, et cetera. And it might feel like that's all down to COP26. But what really is driving that is the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015 by 191 parties that have joined. That represents 97% of all global emissions. And in that Paris Agreement, all countries are asked to make bold, ambitious plans to support limiting of global warming at 1.5 degrees. Now, as part of that agreement, countries also agreed that they would publicly declare their legally binding plans and commitments every 5 years. So 2020 was the very first year since the Paris Agreement was signed that countries had to make those bold commitments and share their nationally determined contributions. So, of course, that has a knock-on effect for businesses in all industries. Now these commitments have been made in late 2020. All governments are going to business leaders and to trade bodies to align on how and what each industry needs to deliver as part of their legally binding commitments. Next slide, please. In this presentation, we'll talk through how growth is being redefined, insights on connection and sustainability, and empowering people to be part of the solution. If you go to the next slide, I'll start with sharing a quote from Alan Jope, CEO. Oh, sorry, one more slide, please. I'll start with a quote from Alan Jope, CEO of Unilever. Unilever are seen as leaders in sustainability, so it is a useful perspective to really understand what they're doing in this space. Now, Alan says, globalization and capitalism are good for a business like ours, but globalization and capitalism at the expense of people and planet are not. And he goes on to say that they need to drive a new model of capitalism to build a better future. And Unilever and other companies aren't really alone in this thinking that capitalism needs to be repaired. Ray Dalio, who's the founder of the world's largest hedge fund and often is cited as the Steve Jobs of investing, says he believes capitalism needs to be reformed as well. So we have eminent business leaders and finance leaders telling us that the way that our economy works needs to evolve. So let's look further into how this is manifesting itself in the business world. Next slide, please. So what was striking about GlobeScan's most recent report in a survey of 700 sustainability experts across 70 countries is what they listed as the top reason for why these experts saw certain companies as strong leaders in sustainability. And the top reason listed and increasing from years past was that they have sustainability integrated in their core business model. A true leader doesn't have sustainability in a siloed part of their organization. It's truly embedded in that core strategy, and it's embodied in everything that that company does. So if we go to the next slide, let's think about how businesses are playing this out. First, we've got B Corp, which I'm sure you've heard of. That's a certification. It's the only certification like it that measures a company's entire social and environmental performance. 3,500 companies are now certified in this, and we're starting to see larger companies like Danone also start to sign up for this in recent times. In the middle here, what you have is an example of Unilever, who have shared publicly their strategy. And their strategy, very interestingly, aligns with the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. And that's really critical. We're seeing more and more businesses that are starting to align their business strategies and really put on even footing the financial goals with the environmental and the societal KPIs. Lastly, remuneration is at the top, is getting linked to sustainability goals with companies. In a recent PwC report, 45% of FTSE 100 companies now have an ESG measure in executive pay. Next slide. An economic model that has gained significant traction in recent years is the circular economy. This model focuses on reduce, reuse, and recycle. At its core, the circular economy looks to extend the life of all products made and consequently reduce what we extract from Earth and what we throw away. This model has significant opportunities in both the short and the long term to drive growth for businesses, and it's why BlackRock is placing such a big bet on it for the future. Next slide, please. So now, just to give you some examples of how this growth can play out, because there's so many great opportunities for businesses. So take supply chains. British Sugar is a brilliant company that's highly innovative in its supply chain. It built major revenue streams from byproducts and waste of its sugar beet processing, including things like animal feed or bioethanol, to renewable energy or horticulture. And I love a quote from the factory manager there, who says, as a business, we aren't necessarily leading in innovation, but we continually challenge our commercial model. You can't control where commodity prices are going, so being 2 or 3 steps in front of those enables more choices as a business. Secondly, there will be more opportunities for new markets brands can build based on new demands. A great example of this is the growth in secondhand markets. So brands are building out models where they can fully own that secondhand market, still maintaining quality control while also being able to offer more affordable and environmentally friendly offerings. Patagonia now, for instance, has a browse used button just below where you can have buy it new. And that's to encourage people to think twice before they're buying new. Lastly, the circular economy paves the way for incredible innovation and collaborations. What do Dole, a fruit manufacturer, and H&M have in common? They have pineapple leaves. Then there's a company called Pinatex, it's a B Corp, that's created an alternative leather material made from pineapple leaves. Hugo Boss, Nike, Paul Smith, Hilton Hotels are all customers, and there's further interest from the automobile industry too. Next slide, please. So some of you may be saying, this is all fine and good, but as an advertising practitioner, where do I fit into this? If you can click just a couple more steps in this slide to just make the build happen, and just one more, perfect, thank you. Whether it's supply chain or new markets or innovation territories, all of these require rich storytelling. Where brands are doing really interesting things with their supply chains to improve either environmental or societal standards, people want to know about it. And likewise, new markets and innovations require awareness and behavior changes in order to be adopted in the mainstream. Each of these affords opportunities to businesses and therefore supports them as they look to redefine models of growth. And growing in a circular economy ensures that both people and planet can thrive too. Next slide, Pete, please, and I will now pass over to Pete.
Thanks, Steph. So the question is, how do you effectively communicate the sustainable changes you're making as a business? That storytelling that Steph was just talking about. Or if you'd like people to make sustainable changes, how do you encourage them to do it in an effective way? So generally, I'm going to be talking about how do you effectively connect with sustainability. Next slide, please. Because it's not just governments and policy pressure that is building on businesses to change. People are looking to businesses to take a leading role from the very top. If you click on one, please. In fact, 76% of people think that CEOs should take a leading role in the change. And according to a recent study by Deloitte, a third of people now have stopped buying a product due to sustainable concerns, whereas over 60% of people have actually changed their shopping behavior to buy more sustainable goods. However, even with that demand, the private sector, if you move on to the next slide, is seen as significantly underperforming. People were asked recently, how would you rate the performance of different organizations on their contribution to progress on sustainable development since the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio? The private sector on this graph, it's a very complicated graph, but you can see the private sector is the black line. So you can see it's hovered around 20% since 2012 and seen no improvement. But even if you go to the next slide, even when businesses are focusing on sustainability and doing good work there, it's not always easy to effectively communicate the changes being made. Whilst the majority of UK adults say they'd like brands to be more vocal about their sustainability efforts, 63% actually believe that brands only get involved in sustainability due to commercial rather than ethical interests. And that's rubbing off on marketeers. There's a significant amount of skepticism, and marketeers are a little bit concerned about this in general. In fact, a recent study by the Chartered Institute of Marketeers found that almost half of marketers have admitted to being wary of working on sustainability marketing campaigns due to the fear that their brand and their organization will be labeled as greenwashing. And those fears have some merit. If you move on to the next slide. If we look at our own data on our own platform, I'll just explain what these two graphs show. The graph on the left shows from 2018 to the present day, the volume of branded content posts on Instagram, including the word sustainable. So you can see that brands have been communicating more and more about sustainable. However, at the same time, graph on the right-hand side shows the number of mentions of greenwashing in public posts on Instagram. So you can see they've both built in the same way. People are becoming more sensitive to sustainability claims, and therefore you really need to start to think about how do we communicate our sustainable actions and our behaviors more effectively and in an authentic way. And if you go to the next slide, we've actually done quite a bit of research on this and learned quite a lot. We've worked with 5 brands running with a sustainable offering and tried to understand what are the big lessons for any brand looking to push a sustainable product or encourage people to make sustainable behavior change. And there are 3 big learnings from this piece of research. The first one is about finding the right audience. Across all 5 brands, we found that the 25 to 34 audience was a lot more receptive and interacted a lot more with sustainable products and offerings. This is All Plants that you can see on the slide there. They were one of the brands in the study. They're a plant-based subscription meal service, and they saw that their 25 to 34 ad set had a CPA, the lowest CPA of any age group, and we saw that across all the different brands. The second learning was about making your values credible and clear. And a great example of this is Asket, which is a Swedish clothing company. Their mission is the pursuit of less. And they actually invite customers to buy fewer pieces of quality clothing. In our test, we found that the winning ads focused on that mission around the brand and informed people actually of how expensive the clothing was, rather than the ads that focus just on the product. In fact, they saw a 31% decrease in CPA on the ads that focused on their mission rather than the product. And that was really the final finding that we had from this study. Think beyond product. While a lot of sustainability-focused ads focus on the product, there's often a much bigger story to tell. Vivo Life, which is the ad that you can see there on the screen, is a company from Glastonbury in England, and they make 100% plant-based health and fitness supplements. And they found, running a split test, that those ads that didn't focus on the product but actually focused more on their ethos, so highlighting their carbon neutral supply chain, their products' eco-friendly packaging, actually resulted in a 23% decrease in CPA. The fourth and final finding that we've had working with brands over the last few years on sustainability is regarding partnerships and how important they are to credibly get across your message. And if you go to the next slide, please. A good example of this is Hellmann's in Brazil, who partnered with creators in Brazil to help people fight food waste. So they created this idea called Fridge Heroes, and it was a campaign which encouraged over 100 million people in Brazil to use their leftovers in creative ways. They developed a messenger bot which allowed you to say what leftovers you had in the fridge, and then Fridge Heroes would communicate back a potential recipe. And these recipes came not only from famous social chefs and creators, but also from Fridge Heroes, who are normal people who are sharing their knowledge about how to avoid food waste. And I think this campaign has a really big learning in the need to empower people to be part of the solution. So rather than just talking at people, empower them to be part of the solution. And that's our final section, which Andy's going to take you through right now.
Thank you so much, Pete. Perfect segue. My name's Andy, dialing in from Berlin. And as Pete said, the third and the final insight would be about powering people as being part of the solution. So the recent Climate Assembly, which saw a representative sample of the UK's population, deliberated on how to achieve net zero, noted the importance involving people in the decision making and not just persuading them to change, but actually being part of the conversation. So moving on to the next chart. So according to according to the most recent carbon budget in the UK, is an estimated that nearly 60%, if we keep clicking just to fulfill the slide, thank you, of carbon reduction will come from some level of consumer behavioural change. So around 43% is driven by low carbon tech and consumer adoption of that technology. So for example, electric vehicles, whether that's bikes or whether that's as we saw with Steph, or whether it's cars. 16% is solely driven down by the individual. So things that we all could do. So fly less, for example, eat less meat, and we have already seen a genuine significant change in consumer behavior without this kind of system-wide concerted push. So, for example, meat levels in the UK have been is actually down 17%. Plant-based diets across Europe are up 40%. But it is important to recognise that when it comes down to the individual, it's still only 16%. The onus is really on businesses and on governments. And Pete shared the stat earlier, 76% of people think that CEOs should take the lead on this change. So it's really, really important for brands to show up, but importantly, to be an enabler, helping empower consumers to be part of the solution, encourage them to take action, and demonstrate strong ownership of the problem at hand. For over a decade, we've seen a huge growth in the number of websites and marketplaces that sell only sustainable products, and this is accelerated during COVID. Many more mainstream brands and marketplaces are giving people far more information than we have ever seen to make people have the option to choose in environmentally friendly decision. For example, traffic lighting and eco-friendly signposting is now available at places like Walmart. They have this built for better range. Amazon, climate pledge friendly range, H&M, their conscious collection. And we started to see in the UK this kind of traffic light system in terms of for CPG products, so people can make that choice. We've also seen an explosion of marketplaces during the pandemic, and Trove, for example, is a great example where you can buy secondhand clothing which can be resold. Brands like Patagonia and Adidas are already on board. Depop is another example, just previously been bought by Etsy, that empower people to buy kind of thrift clothing. And one example, Mud Jeans, is where it's a subscription-based service where you can buy and lease, importantly, secondhand denim. So another big shift that we're seeing, both in fashion and in CPG, but also in tech, is this right to repair. So it's no longer acceptable for tech and fashion companies to create products that simply don't last. For example, we've seen Apple criticized by being programmed for obsolescence, and it's really interesting that actually Microsoft is one of the first heads to facilitate this right to repair. And I want to share quickly a number of core principles where and how brands can empower. So, one of my favorite brands, I absolutely adore IKEA. Democratic by design at the core of their DNA. So sorry, next slide and next slide. So here we are. So, give your community home a place to meet, a place to exchange, and a place to learn. So one great example is this, IKEA and their UK Lagom, which is on a Facebook Live group. So Lagom, for those people who know Swedish, means it's about using just the right amount to live. And IKEA's Lagom collection is filled with fantastic ideas, inspiration, and tips to help people reduce waste, save money, which is also very, very important, and be more sustainable, as well as upcycling things that they already have from IKEA. And this project was created by IKEA in partnership with Hubbub, an environmentally charity, and together they created a community of Lagomers, both online and in store. Now, next slide. The second example is about empowering people to act locally. Now, there is often confusion. I know I live in Germany, which is a little bit easier actually, but in the UK, for example, I know that there's often confusion around what, where, when, and how to recycle different materials. It depends on where you live. And what happens is that, millions of tons of recycling or rubbish that could have been recycled ends up in landfills every year. So on Global Recycling Day, so that's last March 19th in the US, we launched a new messenger experience to give people the right information where they can recycle. We work with the Recycling Partnership, which is an NGO, and with leading CPG brands like PepsiCo, just to make it easier for people to make the right decision in their community. Number 3 is, so moving on to the next slide, is channel people's desire to make a difference. A fantastic campaign by ABI, so Corona and Parley. So plastic waste was accepted as payment for a Corona beer. So for Corona and Parley committed to clean 1 square meter of local beach for each pack of Corona that was sold. So absolutely brilliant. So Corona organised local beach cleanups at 800 locations, and then you could collect the plastic waste and use it for payment. And ultimately, it drove 40,000 volunteers and 40 million square meters of beach. So next slide. Lastly, we have 1 or 2 minutes left. Lastly, make it easier for people to make an impact. And a great example, it's actually a Turkish example from Uka, a leading CPG brand in Turkey. To communicate their sustainability efforts and to increase awareness about sustainability, they created a really fantastic documentary series. It touched on 6 key themes around natural resources, clean water, efficiency energy use, waste management, carbon footprint. And what was really, really nice, so Sahika Akurman, who is a Turkish influencer, but more famed for the record holder for free diving and environmentalist, she actually created an AR lens, which basically allowed people to plant trees during AI. And for every tree that was planted in AR, actually they planted trees in real life. So 10,000 trees were planted. So in summary, I think we're maybe a little bit short for time for questions, so apologies for that. So in summary, growth is being refined. Pete's talked about the idea of connect sustainability. I've talked about the idea of empowering people. And moving on to the next chart. And the next chart again. Just ending on a quick video from David Attenborough. So next one. Thank you. He says this is actually in David Attenborough's last video. It says, it doesn't stop here. The final chapters is ours to write. And, it's about disaster or triumph. What happens is really up to us. Sustainability is our responsibility. It's up to us. And particularly for those people who are listening, who are working in the company, that's where we can make the biggest difference. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time.